The check hit the marble in 4 pieces. For 1 full second, nobody in the bank moved. Walter Cole stood at the counter with his hands open, staring at what had just been torn in front of him, $85,000. A federal court seal, and the last proof that the system had finally admitted what it had done to him. Then Brett Callaway looked at him and reached for the phone. "I'm calling the police." By the time Diana Cole walked through the front doors, the damage had already been done. The sound was small, the meaning was not. Brett Callaway had torn it in half before Walter could say a word, then torn it again. 4 pieces of a federal court document scattered across the floor of Meridian Bank's busiest branch, in front of 11 customers who had all stopped pretending not to watch. "You think you can walk in here with a fake check and waste my time?" Brett looked at the old man standing at his counter, at the flannel shirt, the worn jacket, the hands resting calmly on the marble. The way you look at something that has wandered somewhere it doesn't belong. "Get out right now," he said, "before I have you arrested for fraud." Brett did not know the check he had just destroyed was issued by the United States Federal Court, a racial discrimination settlement that Walter Cole had spent 3 years in litigation to win, and the woman whose name was on the regional director's office 3 floors above. The woman Brett had sent his weekly performance numbers to every Monday for the past 11 years was Walter's daughter. In 15 minutes, Brett Callaway would set his badge on this same counter with hands that would not quite stay steady. But to understand how this morning was going to end, we need to understand how it began. Hi, I'm Luna and this is Poppy. Today's story takes place in a bank lobby on an ordinary Tuesday. It's about an old man, a torn check, and a single word, that someone used to explain why they didn't believe him. It's about what happens when a person spends 3 years proving in federal court that they were treated unfairly because of who they are, and then walks into their own bank to deposit the result. And the same thing happens again in the same morning, from someone who has no idea what he's looking at. Before we continue, I want to know where you're watching from. Tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from and what time is it there right now? We read every single one. Now stay with us, because what happens in the next 30 minutes is going to stay with you. This is a story about being seen and about what it costs when you're not. Stay until the end. Walter Cole had been a school principal for 30 years before he retired. Jefferson High School on the South Side, the kind of school that didn't get profiled in education magazines, that didn't have a donor wall in the lobby, that simply did the work of educating the children the city sent it year after year with whatever resources arrived. He had been a Meridian Bank customer for 22 years, same branch. He had opened it the year he became principal, walked in with his first paycheck stub and a young teller who didn't work there anymore, and he had never seen a reason to go anywhere else. 3 years ago, Walter had filed a federal lawsuit. It had started small, a denied loan application that didn't add up, given his credit history and his income. He had asked questions. The answers hadn't satisfied him. He had asked more questions and found, underneath the specific denial, a pattern that a lawyer, and later a federal investigator, and eventually a federal judge, all confirmed was real. The case had taken 3 years. Depositions, document requests, the particular grinding patience that federal litigation requires of people who are not used to having patience demanded of them in this specific, expensive way. He had won. The case had cost him things that no settlement could fully account for. There had been months when the legal fees outpaced what he had saved across 30 years of careful, modest living. There had been moments when his lawyer, a young woman named Priya, who had taken the case largely on the strength of her own conviction that it mattered, had asked him gently whether he wanted to continue, given how long it was taking and how little anyone could promise about the outcome. Walter had always said yes. Not because he was certain he would win. Certainty was not really available in cases like this, and he knew it. But because he had spent 30 years telling students that the process of seeking something true mattered even when the outcome was uncertain, and he was not prepared to discover, at 68, that he had not believed his own lesson. The federal court had agreed with him. $85,000 was the number. But the number was not really the point, and Walter knew that too. What he had actually wanted, across 3 years of depositions and document requests, was something the settlement could not provide and was never going to provide: an acknowledgement from someone in the room that what had happened to him had actually happened, that it was not a misunderstanding, not an isolated clerical error, not something he had imagined or exaggerated or brought on himself through some failure of paperwork or patience. The court had given him that in its way. A judge had read the evidence and ruled in writing with a federal seal that Walter Cole had been treated unfairly because of who he was. That ruling existed now permanently in the public record, regardless of what happened to the check itself. Walter had folded the ruling and kept it in a drawer at home. He had not expected to need it again. The settlement check arrived on a Monday, $85,000, issued by the United States Federal Court. The words "Racial Discrimination Settlement" printed in plain black type across the top. Signed by a federal judge whose signature Walter had looked at for a long moment before placing the check carefully back in its envelope. He did not call his daughter. Diana worked at Meridian Bank, had worked there for 11 years, had been regional director for the past 4. Walter knew this. Walter was, in fact, extremely proud of this, but a man with a valid federal check and a 22-year account should be able to walk into his own bank and deposit it. He still believed that. It was, in fact, close to the central thing he had tried to teach for 30 years, not as a slogan on a wall, but as something he modeled in the way he ran his school. He had made a point every single year of knowing the name of every student in the building, not just the ones in honors classes or on the football team. He had made a point of greeting the custodial staff by name every morning with the same warmth he extended to the superintendent. He believed that the measure of an institution, a school, a bank, anything, was not how it treated the people it was trying to impress, but how it treated the people it assumed weren't watching. He had carried that belief into every bank lobby, every government office, every waiting room he had ever sat in, not as a test he was administering, just as the way he expected the world, at its most basic level, to function. There had been a teacher at Jefferson decades ago, before Walter became principal, who had told him something he never forgot. She had said that the children who needed the most attention were rarely the ones who asked for it loudly. The ones who asked loudly, she said, you could see coming. It was the quiet ones, the ones who had already learned not to expect much, who needed someone to notice without being asked. Walter had spent the rest of his career trying to be the kind of administrator who noticed without being asked. He had not always succeeded, but it had become, over time, less a goal and more a way of moving through the world, a kind of attention he extended automatically to students and teachers and janitors, and eventually to himself, in rooms where he was the one who needed someone to notice. Most of the time, it did. This was going to be one of the times it didn't. He put on a clean flannel shirt. He put the check in his jacket pocket, along with his ID. He drove to the branch he had been going to for 22 years, took a number, and waited. The teller at window 3 was a young man named Josh. Walter slid the check across the counter and laid his ID beside it. Josh looked at the check, looked at Walter, typed something, waited, typed again. "I need a moment," he said, and disappeared into the back. Walter waited. At window 2, a man named Frank, white, mid-50s, sport coat, had come in after Walter and was depositing a check of roughly the same size. 3 minutes, a smile, a receipt, gone. Walter watched this. He said nothing. He'd filed it away, the way he had filed away 1,000 small things over 68 years. Not because each one demanded a response, but because the pattern they formed over time was its own kind of information. There was a particular kind of patience required for moments like this, not the patience of waiting for a bus, but the patience of a person who has decided that reacting in the moment would cost more than it would gain, and that the more useful thing to do with an observation is simply to hold it intact until it's needed. Josh came back 8 minutes later. "The check requires additional verification," he said. "I need to involve the branch manager." "What kind of verification?" "Standard procedure for large amounts." Josh didn't look up. Brett Callaway came out of his office the way men come out when they have already decided what they're looking at. He looked at the check. He looked at Walter. He smiled, not a warm smile, the other kind. "Sir." He picked up the check, examined it with the specific theatrical attention of someone performing skepticism for an audience. "A federal court settlement check for $85,000. He said it like a punchline. "And you're telling me this is yours?" "My name is on it," Walter said. "My account number is on it. I've been a customer here for 22 years. Anyone can write a name on a check. The federal court wrote it." So you say Brett looked around the lobby, not at Walter. Around him, checking the audience. "Sir, do you even know what a racial discrimination settlement is?" he said. "Because people don't just receive checks like this." "Stop, read that again." The check said racial discrimination settlement in plain black type, right on the front, signed by a federal judge. And the man looking at it had decided, based on what he could see, based on a flannel shirt and a worn jacket and an account holder who didn't move through the lobby like he expected anyone's attention, that Walter didn't look like someone who should have it. "I know exactly what it is," Walter said. "I spent 3 years in court to get it." Brett smiled. "Right." Brett Callaway had been a branch manager for 11 years, and in that time, he had developed a particular skill he believed, sincerely, was a form of competence. He had learned to read a customer in the first 4 seconds and adjust his attention accordingly. Most of the time, this simply meant warmth and efficiency, the kind of service that made people feel well cared for. He did not think of it as judgment. He thought of it as instinct, the same instinct that had earned him 3 years running of regional commendations for branch performance. Framed and hanging near his office door, he had built a career on being right about people quickly. He had never had occasion to discover what happened when the instinct was wrong, until $85,000 and a federal court seal were sitting on his counter in 4 pieces. If you've ever watched someone be doubted for something they had every right to, simply because of how they looked when they walked in, leave a like on this story. Because what happens in the next 10 minutes is going to test every person in that lobby. In the waiting area, a woman named Linda put down her magazine. She had been watching since Josh disappeared into the back, not dramatically, just the way people watch things that don't seem right and that they haven't yet decided what to do about. "Excuse me," she said. "Is there a problem with his identification?" "Ma'am, this is a private matter. It doesn't look very private." Linda Foster was 61 years old, retired from 31 years as a hospital administrator, and had spent a significant portion of her career sitting in rooms where people in authority explained decisions, using language that was technically accurate and substantively misleading. She recognized the shape of what she was watching before she could have articulated exactly what it was. She had also learned, across those 31 years, that the moment something started to go wrong for someone else was rarely the moment any one official acknowledged it. By the time any one official acknowledged it, the moment had usually already passed, and what remained was an account of it, someone's word against someone else's, filtered through memory and motive. Linda had decided, somewhere around year 15 of her career, that she would not be a person who only had her word later. She would have something else if she could. Linda reached into her bag and took out her phone. Brett looked at the phone. He looked at the customers who had stopped pretending not to watch. He looked back at the check, and he made his decision. He picked it up, he tore it in half, he tore it again. "This is garbage," he said. "And so is whatever story you walked in here with." The words landed in the lobby the way a dropped glass lands, a sound everyone hears that changes the air in a room before anyone has decided how to react to it. Walter did not flinch. He had been called many things across 68 years by people who had decided, usually quickly, what category he belonged in. He had developed, across those years, a way of receiving such moments that did not give them anything additional to feed on. He simply received it. He let it land. He did not let it move him. The lobby went silent. Walter looked at the 4 pieces of his federal court documents scattered across the marble floor. He didn't speak. He simply looked at them for a moment. Then he crouched down, slowly, and picked up each piece, one at a time, with the careful, unhurried attention of a man handling something that mattered, and placed them in his jacket pocket. He stood back up. "I'd like to speak with your regional director." His voice was completely steady. Brett stared at him. "I'll pass along your request." He walked back into his office. Walter sat down. He put his hands on his knees. He took out his phone. He called his daughter. Diana Cole was in a budget meeting on the 14th floor when her phone lit up with her father's name. She stepped out without a word. His voice on the line was measured, careful. The voice he had used her entire childhood when something required her complete attention, not raised, not alarmed, just precise, every word placed exactly where it needed to go. She understood in 30 seconds. Diana Cole had worked her way to regional director the long way, branch teller at 22, assistant manager at 25, branch manager at 28, and regional director 4 years ago. At 35, after a decade of being, by every account, extremely good at a job that required equal parts financial judgment and the specific diplomatic skill of managing 14 branch managers, who each believed their branch was the one that mattered most. She did not often think of her father's profession and her own as similar, but there was a version of the comparison that held. Both jobs were largely about paying close attention to people other people had stopped paying attention to, and noticing early when something in a system was not working the way it claimed to. "Dad, don't move. I'll be there in 4 minutes." She hung up, picked up her jacket. "Something came up at Branch 7, she told her team. Nobody asked what. She took the elevator down. Brett called the police at 10:47. He came back out to the lobby with a security guard trailing behind him, the way a man brings backup for a 68-year-old customer sitting quietly in a chair. "Sir, I've reviewed your situation," Brett said. "The document you presented is inconsistent with legitimate federal court paperwork." "You destroyed the document," Walter said quietly. "How did you review it?" Brett's jaw tightened. "Sir, I'm asking you one more time to leave voluntarily. I'm not going anywhere. I've been a customer here for 22 years. I'd like to know why my federal court document is in 4 pieces. Because it was fraudulent. Then why did you destroy the evidence?" The lobby was very still. Linda's phone was up, not hiding it. Officer Davis walked in at 11:03. He scanned the room, an old man in a chair, a branch manager with his arms crossed, a woman near the window with her phone raised. He started toward Brett, then he saw Walter, and stopped. "Mr. Cole?" Walter looked up. Walter Cole, Jefferson High School. Walter studied the officer's face. Something clicked. "Marcus Davis. 10th grade history. Yes, sir." Davis straightened, without thinking about it. The way you do when 20 years of muscle memory suddenly stands in front of the person who put it there. "You passed me," Davis said, "when my own father said I wouldn't graduate." Brett stepped forward. "Officer, this man presented a fraudulent document and has been refusing to leave." Davis held up one hand, still looking at Walter. "Can I see the documents?" Walter reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the 4 torn pieces and placed them on the counter one by one, the way he had placed them in his pocket, carefully, in order. Davis fit them together. He read the case number. He checked the court seal. He read the judge's signature. "This is a valid federal court document," he said. "I've handled court paperwork for 12 years. The seal is authentic. The case number is real." He paused, looked at Brett. Davis had run through this exact sequence, reading a document, checking a seal, confirming a case number, probably 1,000 times across 12 years. It was routine. It was the kind of task that, on most days, took up exactly as much of his attention as it needed and no more. It did not feel routine now. He was aware, in a way he could not entirely name, that the next sentence he said was going to matter, not just for the paperwork, but for everyone standing in that lobby who had been watching this unfold for the better part of an hour, forming their own private conclusions about what they were seeing and what it meant. Who tore this up? The lobby went completely still. Brett said nothing. The front door opened. Diana Cole walked across the lobby the way she always moved through her branches, seeing everything, reacting to nothing yet. Josh, at window 3, looked at her badge and found something fascinating on his keyboard. Brett turned, saw her title, went through 5 expressions in 2 seconds. Diana walked straight to her father. "Dad, you okay?" The walk from the front doors to where her father sat took Diana 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, she registered everything: the 4 torn pieces on the counter, Davis's posture, the security guard's uncertain stance, Josh's studied focus on his keyboard, Brett's face cycling through expressions he probably believed were unreadable, and Linda near the window with her phone still raised. She had walked through this lobby thousands of times. She knew every face that worked here, knew which tellers were having a good week and which weren't, knew the particular acoustic quality of the space well enough to register, immediately, that something in it was wrong before she had identified a single specific cause. "I'm fine, baby." She looked at the 4 torn pieces on the counter. She looked at Davis, who gave her the smallest nod. Then she looked at Brett. "Mr. Callaway, walk me through what happened." Brett composed himself. 11 years of managing up had given him a facility with words. "Ms. Cole, I was following fraud prevention protocol. The document presented certain red flags, the amount, the origin, and here he should have stopped. Frankly, the profile of the customer didn't match the type of person who typically receives this kind of settlement." The lobby went completely still. Linda lowered her phone, then raised it again. Davis looked at the wall. Walter looked at the 4 pieces of his check on the counter. 2 words were visible across the torn paper, split between 2 of the pieces: patient and permanent. "Racial discrimination. The profile," Walter said softly. Not a question, not an accusation. Just those 2 words, repeated back quietly, so every single person in that lobby could hear exactly what had just been said, and exactly what it meant, sitting next to the words on the torn check in front of them. Diana looked at her father, then at Brett. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, each word placed carefully. "My father spent 3 years in federal court proving that someone decided he didn't fit a certain profile. He won. The court agreed. They issued that check. And he came to his bank, where he has been a customer for 22 years, to deposit it." She paused. "You destroyed a federal court document. You humiliated him in front of everyone here. You called the police. And when I asked why, you said it was his profile." Brett opened his mouth. "Don't," Diana said. One word, quiet as a door closing. He closed it. She turned to Davis. "Is there any legal basis to detain my father?" "None," Davis said. "The document is legitimate. Mr. Cole is free to go. She turned to Josh. Process Mr. Cole's deposit. Full amount. Now. Josh nodded and got to work. Then, Diana turned back to Brett. I've requested a full audit of Branch 7 transaction records. 18 months. Every manually overridden verification. Something moved across Brett's face. Fast. Gone, Miss Cole. 11 years. I have a family. My father is 22 years. Do the math on who this bank belongs to. She looked at his badge. Leave it with security. Brett unpinned it. Held it for a moment. 11 years. Everything he had thought it made him, and set it on the counter. He walked to the door. He didn't look back. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a badge being set down on a counter. It is not the silence of an ending. Endings are rarely this quiet. It is closer to the silence that follows a door closing somewhere else in a house. Definite, audible, and impossible to take back. Brett Callaway would spend a long time in the weeks that followed, replaying the 4 seconds it took him to tear that check. He would think about the version of himself that had existed before those 4 seconds, a man with 11 years, a framed commendation, a family, a Tuesday morning that had started, for him, like any other. He would understand, eventually, that the 4 seconds had not created anything new about him. They had simply made visible something that had been there, unexamined, the entire time. Davis watched him go, then turned to Walter. Mr. Cole. I'm sorry this happened to you. It's not the first time, Walter said, I know. A slow nod. I hope it's the last. Walter looked at the man who used to sit in the 3rd row of his 10th grade history class. You turned out well, Marcus. It was a small thing to say. Walter had said it the way he said most things, simply, without performance, the way you'd remark on the weather. But Davis would think about it later, on the drive home, in a way he didn't entirely expect. 20 years of a career of decisions made under pressure, of the specific weight that came with the uniform, and somehow, 4 words from a 68-year-old man in a flannel shirt landed harder than most of the commendations on his own wall. Davis smiled. First time all morning. Davis had thought about Jefferson High School more than people probably assumed a police officer would. Not constantly, but at specific moments, the kind of moments where a decision had to be made quickly and it mattered which way it went. He had thought more than once about a particular afternoon in 10th grade when he had been called into Mr. Cole's office, certain he was about to be suspended, and had instead been asked a single question. What do you want to be when this is over? He had not had an answer that day. Mr. Cole had not seemed to mind. He had simply said, think about it. I'll ask you again next week. And he had. And he kept asking in different ways for 2 years until Davis had an answer he believed. 20 years later, the answer was standing in front of him in a bank lobby, holding the torn pieces of a check that should never have been torn. Davis was glad, for once, that his job had brought him somewhere he didn't expect. The audit came back within the hour. 31 transactions, 18 months. Every single one manually flagged after clearing automated verification. All 31 customers were black. Diana sat with that number for a long moment before she did anything else. 31 was not a number that happened by accident across 18 months in one branch. It was not the kind of number that survived being called a coincidence. It was a pattern, the kind of pattern that, when Diana had been coming up through branch management 15 years ago, she had been trained to look for in fraud cases, in compliance reviews, in the specific language of risk assessment. She had spent a career looking for patterns like this in numbers. She had simply never expected to find one with her father's name in it. The audit itself was not complicated to run. Meridian's systems flagged every manual override automatically, and pulling 18 months of them for a single branch took the compliance team less than 40 minutes. What took longer was reading them. Each flagged transaction had a note field. Most of the notes were brief, a few words, the kind of shorthand that branch staff used when they were moving quickly and didn't expect anyone to read the field closely later. Verify ID, confirm source of funds, manager review requested. Individually, each note looked like due diligence. That was, Diana understood exactly the problem. Each one on its own was defensible. It was only when you lined up 31 of them side by side against the customers they belonged to that the patterns stopped being deniable. This was the kind of finding that did not require anyone to have said anything overtly. It only required 31 small decisions, each one easy to justify alone, made consistently enough that the consistency became its own evidence. Diana read every name, then took the elevator back down. Her father was sitting in the waiting area with a cup of coffee, waiting to go to lunch like nothing had happened. "Dad, did you know I worked here when you came in?" "Of course I knew. Then why didn't you just say my name?" He was quiet for a while. Outside, Chicago moved past, taxis, pedestrians, an ordinary Tuesday. "Because I didn't want you to have to use your position," he said, "to protect me from something that should never have happened in the first place." Diana looked at her father, at the lines around his eyes, the gray at his temples, the hands that had picked 4 torn pieces off a marble floor that morning and put them quietly in a jacket pocket. That sentence sat between them heavier than everything else combined. She sat down beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while. They didn't need to. Walter Cole went to lunch with his daughter that afternoon. Ordered what he always ordered. Talked about the things fathers and daughters talk about when they finally have time to sit. The food was good. The coffee was better. For a few hours, the world was exactly the right size. They talked about Diana's daughter, who was learning to read, and had recently developed strong opinions about which books deserved to be read twice. They talked about the house Walter had lived in for 34 years, and the gutter he kept meaning to fix. They talked about a former student of Walter's, not Davis, someone else, who had recently written him a letter out of nowhere, thanking him for something he barely remembered saying. They did not talk much more about the morning. There was not really much more to say about it that the morning itself had not already said. Completely, in the space of about 45 minutes. What they did instead was simpler. They sat across from each other, father and daughter, in a booth by the window, while the city went on outside exactly as it always had, and let that be enough. That was the story. But before we go, I need to leave you with something. There were 31 people who came before Walter. 31 people who walked out of that branch without their deposits processed, without explanations, without a Diana upstairs, without an Officer Davis who remembered their name. They just left. And most of them probably told themselves it was something they had done, said the wrong thing, brought the wrong documents, worn the wrong clothes. Because that's what this kind of treatment does. It doesn't just turn you away at the door, it makes you question whether you deserve to walk through it in the first place. Walter Cole had 30 years of being a principal, 22 years as a customer, and a federal court ruling in his favor. And it still took a torn check on a marble floor. A former student in uniform, and a daughter 3 floors up for the truth to be heard out loud in that lobby. Most people don't have any of that. Most people just have themselves and a counter and someone who has already decided what they're looking at. Think about the 31 names on that audit for a moment, not as a statistic, as 31 mornings. 31 people who got dressed, drove somewhere, stood at a counter, and were told, in one way or another, that something about them didn't add up. 31 people who walked back out to their cars and sat there a minute before starting the engine, running through what they could have said differently, worn differently, whether it was somehow their fault. It almost never is. So the next time you're in a room, a bank, a store, a waiting area, anywhere, and you see someone being treated the way Walter was treated, don't look at your phone to avoid it. Don't find something fascinating on your keyboard. Be Linda, because the 31 people who came before Walter needed someone to do exactly that. And somewhere, right now, person number 32 just walked through a door. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you what it costs to look away like this video and subscribe to Poppy Tailies, tell us in the comments. Has someone ever stood up for you in a moment like this? Or have you ever been the one who stood up? We read every single one. And if someone you know needs this today, share it with them. Thank you for being here. I'm Luna. This is Poppy. Until next time.